Welcome to me, where suspenseful, thrilling, and mysterious stories will draw you into a world where the lines between reality and fantasy seem to blur. When the night falls, when all the sounds gradually quiet down, leaving only your own heartbeat and breathing, that's when these stories begin. Tensions, unsolved mysteries, moments that will make you hold your breath in fear or curiosity, all are waiting for you ahead. Find a comfortable seat, dim the lights, and let this sound guide you on a journey that is not for the faint of heart. I want each of you to leave a comment sharing where you are in the world. And if you are enjoying the episodes, don't forget to give a like and subscribe to the channel now. Relax. Are you ready? If so, join me in the first story right now. Venus, buried. The girl in the graveyard is your best friend, so you take her home. The night is a bruise between you, a blotch of rogue in the passenger window, the color of fruit left out to fester. The body pries at her seatbelt, a finger, then two. The radio echoes static. The body shuffles in her seat. You study the face, the similar slice of jaw, the nose humped from where a baseball had hit her at 12, just slightly off-center. The skin like a rain-licked plastic bag, the stink of musk and sulfur. You want to look away, but you cannot. She's so beautiful, even like this. Your headlights rake warbled slits through the dirt road, a yellow like jaundice. Your hands are stiff from the cold, your lips cracked. The girl beside you is dead, and you are bringing her home. 4 days ago, you'd stepped into a hardware store and emerged with a shovel sturdy enough to lift a life on. 4 days, you'd spent digging dirt in your own backyard yard until loam muddied under your fingernails and erratic holes split garden beds like the mouths of greedy beasts. Until you could sift through soil with your eyes closed, with a hand bound. 4 nights you had laid in your bed, staring at the pockmarked ceiling, wondering what it felt like to burn alive. Now, the shovel beats dull against the skin of your trunk, your hands gripping the steering wheel like a throat you're trying to silence. The body turns, dawn bleaching the salmon gray of her skin. The left eye slips from its socket, and she pushes it back in with the heel of her hand. She smiles, head lolling like a marionette's. "Sorry, baby." Her voice comes out strained. "I wasn't expecting company. I'm sure you understand." In a sickle of citrus moonlight, Adeline Marcus smiles up at you with shell-pale gums. Adeline Marcus died on the 31st of October and was buried a week later, the date on her gravestone a month shy of her 18th birthday. In the court, the boys would claim it was an accident, that they didn't know she was inside. For better or worse, you believe them. The fingers striking out matchboxes, the beer cans constellating the sidewalk. A prank gone too far, the wrong place, the wrong time. It doesn't have to be on purpose. She didn't have to be home. The coroner ruled it suffocation. But all you can imagine is flame like a stiff palm, striking over and over. Adeline had crawled from the mouth of the home on her hands and knees. She was dead by the time she reached the pavement, her Sunday dress singed up to her knees. The dress you knew well enough. Either way, the boys were left with 25 to life, and the Marcas were left with a dead daughter, a ring of ash like chalk on the pavement. You were left with a misplaced guilt, like hunger, a guilt like an Ouroboros, choking on the tail, swallowing the head, eating yourself alive and being unable to stop, even as it consumes you. Because this wasn't the sort of thing that happened to good people. You watch water curl down your shower drain, carrying with it mortuary makeup, kaleidoscopic insects, and jasmine bubbles. Strings of dirt stretched out like sinew. The body's head rests on her knees, vertebrae needling through her back like a line of molars. The electric lights wash her green, dark veins rooted under brittle skin. She turns her face to the showerhead and picks at the powdery sediment under her fingernails. The shower floor is a mess of grit. And you think of a child scooping up the sand. You turn the heat up until it scalds and scrub mildew from the base of the shower door. You think, if you can only get everything clean, everything will be all right. She turns her head and looks at you through eyes obscured by glass paneling. She says, "It's not as bad as all that." I don't even think I felt a thing, but she says it through lips the color of spoiled plums, so the sentiment doesn't ring true. You lift threadbare towels from the bottoms of your linen closet. You walk 3 times around your block and return to a corpse sat on your sofa like she has nowhere better to be. There are ants in your sugar bowl. You try to remove them, lift their crystal-knotted bodies on the prong of a fork, but they slip between the gaps, and you are left with a mess bigger than when you started. Tea-brown sludge bleeding from thoraxes and the stink of vinegar. There's a dead girl on your sofa, but let's focus on the ants in your sugar bowl. The way they thread through cysts of white like veins on a leaf, like the capillaries that run through the skin of your face. You make tea anyway. You add too much milk and sit cross-legged in front of the body. She stares at you. You stare back. The two of you drink, and ribbons of watery milk pour clean out her trachea, the gaping hole in her chest. But she doesn't stop drinking until you do. "You're not looking at me," she says. "Not really." "Yes, I am." You twist your hands in the shag carpet. "Aren't I now?" "No," she says. "You're not." You leave your teacup on the floor, saucer an iris of yellow, and go upstairs. You take 2 cigarettes from the carton squashed on your father's desk, and then think better of it. Press down with your heel until tobacco dissipates into the tawny carpet. You change your bed sheets twice, eggshell white, no, gray with peonies. You make a second cup of tea. When you get back to the room, the body is still there. You are looking at her. You are not looking at her. Do I disgust you? She says. No. She shakes her head, dark hair plastered to her shoulders like reeds. No more than I always did. You need to sleep. You say, baby. She tilts her head to one side. Sleeping is all I've ever done. The last time you saw Adeline Marcus alive was in the back of a stranger's car, parked on a stranger's street, with the taste of a stranger's tequila fresh between your lips. You were never too built for parties, so the outcome was a pair of girls who looked like they were playing dress-up. Blousy dresses with sleeves like a nun's. Thrift store necklaces noosing your necks. Shoplifted lipstick, which she hid beneath her mattress. More wax than pigment. But in the citrus peel of street lights, in the low trill of distant music, the two of you looked beautiful. She had her legs curled under her and was sitting sideways in the back seat, her hand resting on your knee and the other palmed against the window, a song on her lips that you couldn't quite place. You were too close, but it was night, and everyone was inside and drunk. And sometimes we all need to feel closer than we should be, to lose ourselves a little. The song melted on her lips, swallowed into the limp press of salvia and booze. And you said something like, I think I should go home now. And she said something like, have another drink. And so you did. You let her pour the liquor into the flimsy mouths of red plastic cups and watched her swallow. She said, you're so pretty. And you said, I think you should stop. And she said, just let me say that one thing. And you wanted to say, stop fucking looking at me like that. And you wanted to say, I want to crawl inside you and make a life for myself in the city of your mind. And you wanted to say, let's just be quiet. Let's just not talk. Let's just not ruin a good thing by telling the truth. Instead, you pushed open the passenger door, stumbled out onto the skin of vein blue sidewalk. I'm going home now. The body lays with her back to your bed, hands worming in the floral sheets, chestnut hair spilling across her throat, past the ballpoint pen-marred bedposts, over the gray skin of her forehead. You are thinking about the silken mouth of a coffin. You are thinking of how she looked when you pulled her from the rose mouth of heaven. The radiator hums. A lace curtain bellies your open window. She rolls over onto her side, slots her hands together like pieces of a decaying jigsaw puzzle. You still can't even look at me. Her mouth moves too slowly, words like chewing gum. Why am I here, Bet? What's it for? There are pink crescent moons on the bed of your palms from the bite of your nails. She pulls her knees to her chest, and a bone cracks. She pulls her knees to her chest, and a molar tumbles from between her keyhole lips. You can only love me when I'm not here. You can only love me when there's nothing left to love. You press your cheek to the cool spread of linen beside her. You listen to the steady beat of your heart, the way you can feel it in your fingertips, entirely singular. Don't tell anyone. You say, did you want it to die with me, Beta? She shifts, and her hair falls against the nape of your neck. Were you glad it was silenced? Don't tell anyone. You say again. She sighs, lays herself back down, so you're face to face. Crooked nose, eye pulling from its socket. The onset of gray-green decay wreathing her jaw. The smell of soil and rot and cicada-heavy nighttime. Who could I tell? She brushes your hand. I'm not really here. And suddenly, you can imagine it is your fists splitting beer cans in two, like overripe fruit. It is your fingers on the matchbox, your fingers striking out. But you both know the house would still be on fire. And you both know you'd leave alone. You take her hand. You put your face in the crook of her neck and beg forgiveness from a ghost. The above story ends, but the suspense and thrill have never stopped. Right here is another equally interesting story. Please continue listening, eyes wide open. The sun hung low in the sky, casting shadows over the cemetery. It was a beautiful day for a funeral. Mourners gathered at the top of the hill, circling the open coffin to say their last goodbyes as Donna Herman had passed, or so they thought. Her family, dressed in black, stood closest to the coffin. Blurry shapes hovered above her. Muted voices drifted through the thick fog of her mind. Distant, yet familiar. Donna Herman wanted to scream. She could see them. Her children, her grandchildren, her so-called loved ones, standing around her, dressed in black, murmuring their final goodbyes. The sky loomed somewhere beyond them, pale and streaked with the fading sun. The coffin beneath her was lined with silk and covered in a thick scent of lilies. In the words of the pastor beside her, she was dead, but she wasn't. She was right there. She could hear them. She could see them. Panic surged through her, slamming against the walls of her motionless body. She tried to move, to twitch a finger, to part her lips, to scream, but nothing obeyed. She was trapped in her own body. Frank was the first to give the eulogy. He was Donna's first son, her golden child. As he spoke, his younger brother, Josh, stared silently at their mother's body. Even in death, the old woman refused to rest. He remembered the doctor's remark that no matter what they tried, his mother's eyes wouldn't shut. They had asked him if he wanted to sew them shut, but he couldn't bring himself to do it, and neither could his elder brother or younger sister. "Are you Joshua Herman?" Josh blinked, snapping out of his thoughts and turning to the source of the voice on his left. "Oh, just Josh, sir," he said, clearing his throat. Two men in black suits stood before him, wearing sunglasses and carrying an aura of authority. The one on the left spoke first. "Nice to meet you, Josh. I'm Detective Foreman, and this is my partner, Detective Davis," he said, extending a hand. Josh shook it. "Thanks for coming out here. I didn't know what else to do." "You did the right thing by calling the police," said Detective Davis. "We'll investigate this matter thoroughly." Josh offered them an awkward nod as he noticed his brother's speech was about to come to an end. "I'll speak with you after the funeral," he said, before walking up to the podium to give his own speech. The detectives stuck around, speaking to everyone who seemed like a person of interest. "She was like a mother to me," cried Cheryl Herman, Frank Herman's wife. She clutched tightly to her tissues, crocodile tears sliding endlessly down her cheeks. Her husband comforted her by rubbing her shoulder, but he too was too distraught to be questioned properly. Josh's wife, Celia Herman, had a lot to say about the entire family. She grumbled about how much Josh had suffered due to his and his mother's disagreements over his marriage. "We haven't been over in a while," she muttered. "I only know that Frank and Millie were the ones in charge of her care after we left the house." "Can you tell us more about Frank and Millie?" Detective Davis asked. "Sure thing," Celia said. She turned to the boy sitting on her lap. "Won't you go to Daddy now? His speech is about to end." She ushered away what looked to be a 5-year-old boy, the spitting image of Josh Herman. Once he was gone, she reached into her purse, pulling out a cigarette and lighting it. "What would you like to know?" she said, blowing out a cloud of smoke. Detective Foreman coughed. "Anything you could tell us that you think is relevant will do," he said, waving the smoke away from his face. Celia took a long drag before she spoke. "Frank is the golden child, you know. He can do no wrong in that old bag's eyes. Even though Josh has been the one keeping the business afloat, Frank has always gotten all of the credit. And Millie," she exhaled slowly, tapping the ashes off the side of her chair. "Well, Millie's got her own issues. Dating a scumbag like Cameron. What was your and your husband's relationship like with the deceased before she passed?" Detective Davis asked. Celia sighed and pressed the cigarette into the armrest beside her. "I haven't spoken to that woman or set foot in her house since she called me a gold-digging whore the day I gave birth to Gabe," she said bitterly. "Josh always tried to keep the peace, though. He spoke to her as often as a son should." Detective Davis nodded, jotting down notes. "Right. Thank you, Mrs. Herman. We'll contact you if we have any further questions." He exchanged a few quiet words with his partner, and the two detectives split off into the crowd. Detective Foreman, found Cameron, lingering near the back of the gathering, hands shoved into his pockets, rocking slightly on his heels. Unlike the rest of the family, he didn't appear grief-stricken. If anything, he looked bored. "Cameron, right?" Foreman asked, pulling out his notebook. "Yeah." Cameron barely glanced at him. "How long have you been with Millie Herman? A couple of years?" "Nothing serious." Cameron shrugged. "Look, man, I don't know what you expect me to say. The old bag hated me, wouldn't even let me within 10 feet of the mansion." Foreman raised a brow. "Why didn't she like you?" "I'm a DJ," Cameron said flatly. "You think Donna Herman would have wanted her goody two-shoes daughter with someone like me?" He flicked his gaze toward the casket, his lip curling slightly. "Not that it matters now." At the same time, Detective Davis approached two well-dressed men standing slightly apart from the family. Julio Hernez, a longtime business associate of Donna's, and Ben Handover, her lawyer. "Mr. Hernez, Mr. Handover," Davis greeted. "Mind if I ask you a few questions?" Julio adjusted his cufflinks. "Of course, Detective, though I don't know what else to say. Donna's death was unexpected." Ben let out a sigh. Truly unexpected. There was still so much to be done before he stopped himself. Davis caught the hesitation, his grip tightening on his notepad. "Before what?" Ben hesitated, lowering his voice. "Before she finalized the changes to her will." Davis's brow lifted. "What changes?" She mentioned wanting to reassess her assets and how they would be distributed, but she fell into a coma before anything was made official. Julio cut in smoothly. "Donna was very careful with her affairs. It's a shame she never got the chance to put her final wishes into writing." Davis absorbed the information. A sudden death right before a change to a will? That was a clear motive for murder. But who in the Herman family would have wanted Donna gone before she could make those changes? His gaze shifted to the nearby staff. Anne, Donna's longtime maid, stood with red-rimmed eyes, clutching a handkerchief. Beside her, Carlos, the butler, remained stoic, his expression unreadable. Davis approached them. "Did either of you notice anything unusual in the days leading up to Mrs. Herman's passing?" Anne sniffled. She was in a coma, but she was showing signs of improvement. I never thought." She shook her head, unable to continue through the sobs. Carlos cleared his throat. "There were tensions, sir. Madame Herman's children didn't see eye to eye when it came to her care." His eyes flickered toward Frank, Cheryl, and Millie. Frank and Cheryl insisted she remain at home. Millie argued she'd be better off in a care facility. Davis frowned. Cheryl was involved in Donna's care? Carlos hesitated before nodding. More than involved. She handled everything with the doctor. He wasn't just hired for Donna. He's been treating Cheryl's family for years. Davis narrowed his eyes. That was a detail worth investigating. Donna fought harder to be able to move, but her body would not listen. She knew who had harmed her. She could tell them herself if she could just speak. Desperation clawed at her, and somehow she forced her eyes to shift, darting around in search of anyone who noticed. And someone did. Gabe, the little boy's breath hitched. He didn't understand death. Not fully. He didn't like funerals, didn't like the way Grandma looked in the coffin, and he certainly didn't understand why, if she was supposed to be asleep forever. She had just blinked at him. "Mommy!" His voice trembled. "Mommy, Grandma's eyes are moving." Silence, then a soft chuckle. "Oh, sweetheart," Celia cooed, smoothing down his hair. "That's just your imagination, honey. Grandma's asleep." "No, no, no!" Donna screamed inside her mind. "I'm here! I'm still here!" A new voice, warm and honeyed, drifted over the murmurs. Children and their wild imaginations, right? Donna's blood ran colder than the silk beneath her. Cheryl, the woman who had put her here, the woman who had killed her, and no one would ever know. One by one, her family members approached to place flowers on her coffin. Some averted their eyes. Others kept them tightly shut. No one dared to look at her face. And no matter how hard she tried to flicker her gaze, no one noticed. Then, the last one stepped forward. Cheryl, Donna's blood boiled beneath her frozen skin. Cheryl smiled sweetly, crocodile tears welling in her eyes as she spoke about family, about bonds that could never be broken. Then she leaned down, her lips brushing against Donna's ear. "I know you're still in there." She pulled back just enough to meet Donna's unblinking stare, a serene expression settling over her face. One hand caressed Donna's cheek, as if in mourning. "Don't you worry." Cheryl's words seeped down her ear like a searing poison. "I'll have Frank join you as soon as the inheritance comes through." Let's continue with the next no less thrilling stories. Echoes in the Dark. Michelle Byers woke to the hum of the oxygen machine and the sterile white glow of hospital lights. She had survived the crash. Her husband, Daniel, had not. They told her she had been unconscious for days, and in those days, the world had stolen her sense of normalcy. Recovery was grueling. Her body ached, but her mind suffered more. The doctors diagnosed her with narcolepsy, an after effect of the trauma. She struggled to distinguish wakefulness from the strange visions that plagued her. But nothing prepared her for what came next. Chapter 1. Fractured Pieces. The house felt empty without Daniel. Michelle moved through the rooms like a ghost herself, touching the furniture, the framed photographs, the tiny details of a life that had once been whole. Every object felt sacred, preserved in time, but also hollow without him. Then the strange things began happening. The first time, she thought she was imagining it. She walked into the kitchen one morning to find Daniel's favorite coffee mug on the counter. It wasn't just there. It was filled exactly as he would have made it. 3 sugars, 2 splashes of cream. She froze. Her breath came in quick, shallow bursts. She reached out with a trembling hand and touched the ceramic. It was warm. Did I do this? She whispered to herself. She had no recollection of making the coffee. She dumped it in the sink, trying to push away the nagging thought clawing at the back of her mind. That night, she checked Daniel's drawer, the one where she had placed his watch, his wedding ring, his last belongings. The watch was gone. She searched frantically. Through the drawers, through the entire bedroom, the nightstand, the closet. Nothing. Lack of sleep, she muttered. That's all this is. But then the voicemails started. Chapter 2. Echoes of the Past. One evening, as she walked into the living room, the red light on the answering machine blinked. It was an old relic, something Daniel had insisted on keeping despite her protests about just using their cell phones. She pressed play. Hey, love. Just letting you know I'll be home late. Don't wait up. Her breath hitched. His voice, crisp and casual, like it always had been. Like he wasn't dead. Her legs buckled, and she collapsed onto the couch, pressing her hands to her mouth. She checked the timestamp. The message had been left yesterday. She deleted it. An error it had to be, but it happened again and again, every few nights. The same message, with slightly different wording. Sometimes it was just a simple, "Love you. See you soon." She played one for her friend Angela. Angela's face paled. This is some sick joke. I swear, I'm not making this up. Angela reached for her hand. Michelle, this isn't healthy. Maybe it's your condition. Your doctor said hallucinations are possible with narcolepsy. Michelle recoiled. You think I'm imagining this? Angela hesitated. I think grief can do strange things. And you haven't been sleeping. Michelle didn't argue. What was there to say? She made an appointment with her doctor, who prescribed sleeping pills to help regulate her sleep cycles. Chapter 3. The Stranger in the Coffee Shop. For weeks, the house was quiet. No misplaced objects, no strange messages. It was almost as if, by sleeping more, she had sealed whatever crack had let the past bleed into the present. Then she saw him. She was at a small cafe downtown, sipping on chamomile tea, staring blankly at her phone. It was an overcast afternoon, a steady drizzle coating the streets outside in shimmering gray. The bell over the door jingled, and a figure stepped inside. Her breath stopped in her throat. Daniel, sitting at a table near the window, laughing, his eyes crinkling in that way they always had. A woman sat across from him, stirring her coffee. Michelle's heart pounded as she stood, nearly knocking over her cup. She stumbled toward the door, her vision tunneling. Outside, The streets were a mess of honking cars, sloshing tires, and blurred figures. She tried to cross, barely noticing the screech of brakes and a driver shouting at her as she nearly stepped in front of a cab. By the time she made it to the other side, Daniel was gone. She pressed her hands to the cafe window, her breath fogging up the glass. No. No, no, no. Her hands shook as she pulled out her phone and called Angela. "He's alive," she gasped. "Angela, I swear to God, I just saw him." Angela's voice was strained. "Michelle, that's impossible. I saw him," she screamed, drawing the attention of pedestrians. She turned, scanning the street wildly. No sign of him. Chapter 4. The cracks in reality. When she got home, the silence of the house felt like it was pressing down on her. She sat on the couch, her hands gripping her knees. Had she really seen Daniel? Was she losing her grip on reality? As exhaustion pulled at her, she drifted into a restless sleep. And then a sound, footsteps, familiar, slow. Moving toward the bedroom, her heart pounded as she forced herself up. The house was dark, the air thick with something unspoken. She crept toward the bedroom, every step feeling heavier than the last. She pushed open the door. Nothing. Her breath came in ragged gobs. She turned on the light. The room was empty. Just her mind playing tricks again. She sat on the bed, tears burning her eyes. What's happening to me? Then her phone rang. She snatched it up, hands shaking. Mom? Honey? Her mother's voice was soft. I just wanted to check on you. I'm not okay, Michelle whispered. Mom, I saw him. I saw Daniel. Her mother hesitated. Michelle, you know we talked about this before. You and Daniel discussed his wishes in case something happened. You don't remember? A cold wave washed over her. No, we never had that conversation. Her mother sighed. And what about your trip to the lake house last summer? The one he planned? The words stuck in her throat. That never happened. Did it? Then she noticed something else. Her hands, they were different. The faint scar from childhood, gone. The calluses from her years of playing piano, missing. Her reflection in the bedroom mirror flickered for a second. An almost imperceptible glitch, as though the pixels themselves struggled to keep her image in place. Then the bedroom door creaked open. Footsteps, familiar, a shadow in the doorway. Michelle, the voice whispered. Her pulse stilled. Her breath caught in her throat. She turned and saw herself standing there, watching. The world cracked apart. Darkness swallowed her whole. When Michelle awoke, the room looked the same, but wrong. The pictures on the wall were slightly different. Her wedding photo with Daniel now showed them standing in front of a place they had never been. The color of the curtains had changed. Her phone no longer recognized her face. She stumbled to the bathroom, flicked on the light, and gasped. The reflection stared back with blank eyes. Her face, similar, yet unfamiliar. sharper jaw, eyes a shade too light, skin too smooth. The scar on her collarbone from the skiing accident years ago was gone. A mechanical voice echoed faintly from her phone behind her. System error. Biometric mismatch. Please verify user identity. She backed away from the mirror, from the glass that shimmered like liquid for half a second, as if the world was re-rendering itself in real time. She opened drawers, desperate for something familiar, something hers. But the clothes weren't hers. The books on her shelf bore her name as the author, only she'd never written them. The covers depicted surreal scenes, cities made of bone, people with stitched smiles, hollow-eyed children staring up at crimson moons. She ran outside. The street was there, but so quiet. The sky above was bruised purple, the clouds tinged with red. No birds, no wind. Every person she passed moved too slowly, their limbs jerky, robotic. They didn't blink, didn't speak, didn't see her. Michelle walked in a daze, her breath fogging in the warm air. The newsstand still had papers, but the headlines made her stomach twist. Temporal leak worsens. Memory replacements imminent. Global consciousness sync delayed. Users report phantom lives. Version control glitch detected. Subject 487. M. Byers. Flagged for recalibration. Subject? She turned to flee, but froze when she saw the cafe. The same cafe where she'd seen Daniel weeks ago. And there he was again, laughing, alive. Wrong. Sitting across from someone with her face. The other, Michelle, turned, and their eyes met. The world paused. A buzzing started low in her ears, rising to a high-pitched shriek. The people froze mid-step. The air shimmered. The other Michelle stood slowly and began to walk toward her. Michelle backed up, stumbling into a metal pole. A nearby screen flickered to life, displaying the symbol of an eye with fractals radiating outward. Then, a voice spoke from nowhere and everywhere. Welcome, Subject 487. Consciousness sync complete. Version displacement detected. Initiating purge. Michelle screamed, but there was no sound. Only light. And then oblivion. Epilogue. Static. In a bright, white room with no doors, Michelle sits at a desk. Her hands type furiously on a keyboard that glows with symbols she doesn't recognize. On the wall, a screen shows surveillance feeds. Dozens of herselves navigating fractured realities. Some crying, some lost, some laughing beside Daniel. A door finally opens behind her. A figure enters. It's her again. This time, dressed in clinical white, clipboard in hand. Her eyes are cold, unblinking. Reset failed. Clipboard Michelle says. They always fight it. Desk Michelle whispers. They remember too much. Clipboard. Michelle tilts her head. Try a deeper extraction next time. Desk. Michelle nods, tears streaking down her face. Which one is the real me? The clipboard falls to the floor. No answer. The light flickers. The room glitches. And somewhere, in another version of reality, a woman named Michelle Byers wakes up again. To the hum of an oxygen machine and the sterile white glow of hospital lights. Was it all a dream, or was this the dream? She doesn't know anymore, and maybe she never did. And the next story will be told right away. Please listen carefully. Death of the Lilacs. I never should have opened that letter. But from the moment my fingers brushed the aged paper, thin and fragile, it seduced me. It all started on estate sale day. On any other Thursday, I would wake up crazy excited, strip out of my cotton PJs, and swap them for jeans and my gray V-neck, the one with vintage across the chest in fading white vinyl. I would appreciate the scent of the fresh lilacs that had just bloomed outside my window, their enchanting aroma drifting in as a passenger on the early morning breeze. Then I'd head out for a long, adventurous day of treasure hunting. There's something magical about rescuing a forgotten piece of furniture or trinket. It drives me, knowing that each piece will start a new life, absorbing new memories. It is intoxicating. But that Thursday, I woke up with an uneasy feeling that I immediately brushed off, assuming it was residual bad dream funk. Through my vintage lace curtains, I could see evidence of a cloudy day, doing nothing to brighten my spirit or improve my mood. And then there were the lilacs. This morning, their fragrance was thick, overpowering, and instantly turned my stomach. With an irritated mumble, I reached over and slid the window shut with a sharp thud. Pulling the blanket over my head, I heavily considered going back to sleep. However, 15 minutes later, I was dressed and headed out the door. Unheard of for me. It was as if I had somewhere urgent to be, but when I checked my calendar app, there was nothing booked. As I locked the door behind me, the heavy scent of the lilacs filled the air, overbearing and inescapable. They had sprung up from out of nowhere just a few weeks ago, their soft purple and white blossoms spilling over the wooden railing of my front porch. At first, I welcomed them, admired them, but now they felt invasive, their presence needling at my already fraying mood. I had been at the first sale of the day for about half an hour, and it seemed like a bust. After wandering from room to room, sifting through boxes and stacked containers of someone else's memories, I was just about ready to head to the next stop on my Google Maps list. As I stepped into the kitchen, I suddenly lost my balance and grabbed the long slab of butcher block countertop to steady myself. Instantly, my senses were overwhelmed. Years of long-forgotten Sunday morning breakfasts, afternoon bread proofs, and late-night Christmas cookie bakes. The heavy scent of bacon and coffee made me dizzy and hungry at the same time. I heard a child laughing and turned to see a little girl hiding her giggles behind a cupped hand as she pointed at Tom, chasing Jerry across the flickering screen of an old tube TV. Then a scream rang out, sharp and raw, echoing into my soul, almost as if it came from within. As I released my grip on the countertop, I spun around to see what had happened. Instantly, everything changed. The warm scents of breakfast were gone. The little girl, gone. The TV wasn't even plugged in, its frayed cord hanging eerily off to the side. It was just the humdrum sound of a normal estate sale, with people milling about and haggling the cashier with lower price offers. I just stood still, trying to breathe and make sense of what had just happened before I could grasp any ounce of stability. A sudden ding from the oven sent me nearly jumping out of my own skin. I bolted past the cashier and straight for the front door. "Edith," I stopped. My feet, my heart, and my breath. Everything just stopped. My body turned and drifted past the "Watch Your Step" sign as I felt pulled down the wooden steps into the garage. It sat still, empty of people, empty of life, yet oddly full of the scent of lilacs. Why couldn't I escape it? I hadn't been in this room yet. I had peeked inside earlier, but it seemed full of things I usually ignored. Pesticides, old mulch, motor oil, nothing that belonged in an antique booth. Yet here I was, drowning in the scent of lilacs with not a bloom in sight. Why had I come? I wanted to leave. All at once, sunlight pushed its way through the clear glass windows of the garage door, spilling onto a small, frail woman seated at the desk in front of me. The same desk that, just seconds before, had been buried beneath years of dust and piled high with empty boxes. An old ladder leaning against one side. All of that was gone now, and I could smell breakfast again. "Edith, I work all day to put food on this table. You think it's gonna cook itself?" The dark voice boomed behind me. I flinched, but couldn't tear my eyes from her. The woman turned and looked right at me. And then, after just a second of recognition, right through me, she turned back to the desk and in a swift, almost frantic motion, shoved a piece of paper into an envelope. I heard her whispering something, but the words were too soft to make out. "Damn it, woman, where are you?" came the voice from the top of the stairs. My instinct was to spin around, to see him, but my eyes stayed fixed on Edith. She was facing me now, her gaze moving down the staircase as he came down. "You know better than to keep me waiting," he said, his words rolling down the back of my neck like sap oozing from a wounded sweet gum tree. I resisted the urge to to wipe it away, Edith slid her trembling hands into her apron. Her gray eyes hovered just above my head, steady in his direction. Slowly, her shoulders curled back, pushing her tiny frame to stand tall. Her chin lifted just enough to prove her fortitude. But the slow rise and fall of her chest wasn't from resolve. It was control, each breath measured to contain her emotions. Yes, I'm sorry. I should have been more mindful of your time. The bacon's on now. I'll have breakfast ready in just a few minutes. I could feel his heat standing uncomfortably close behind me. The hair on the back of my neck lifted with each of his heavy breaths as he considered his reply. Finally, he muttered, "You'd better." The sound of his heavy boots grew lighter as he moved toward the stairs. Her eyes were back on me, not through me. She stood still for a moment, as if thinking something through. Then, as if she had made her decision, she turned toward the desk and opened the top left drawer. She looked at me again, then down at the drawer. I followed her gaze. With a careful hand, she slid the bottom of the drawer back, pulled the envelope from her apron pocket, placed it in the hollow space, and closed the drawer. Her gaze shifted to me once more, her eyes trying to tell me a story, calling my name. Her mouth opened, her expression full of apology, but no words came. As she took a step forward, the sunlight caught the iridescent trail of a single tear that had run down her cheek. My heart hurt for her. All at once, she was gone. The sun had vanished. The windows on the garage door had been painted over years ago. The acrid smell of gasoline, oil, and pesticides flooding my nose once again. I gasped and wiped my face, realizing that I, too, had tears streaming down my cheeks. I took a few steps toward the desk, my eyes locked on the drawer. My pulse quickened as I reached out to pull it open. "Miss, do you need help?" came a tiny voice from the top of the stairs. I jumped and screamed. Then she screamed. With our hands over our chests, we both burst into laughter. "I am so sorry, doll. I didn't mean to startle you. It's totally okay. I was in my own world." I took a deep, slow breath, in and out. "Actually, yes, I would like some help. I'm interested in this desk, but I don't see a price on it," I said, pointing to the spot where the woman had just been sitting. "Oh, that old thing is junk, honey. One of the drawers is stuck, and it's missing a leg." She turned to head back through the door. I looked at the desk, then back at her. "All the same, I'd love to take it off your hands. Would you take 20 for it?" She stopped and turned around. Her expression shifted. I could see the dollar signs in her eyes and a slight hint of a smirk on her lips. Then, just as quickly, it changed again to a look of faux concern. "Well, that did belong to the homeowner. and I am trying to get the family top dollar. I couldn't possibly let it go for $20, but I imagine they'd be okay with $50. Does that work for you? $20 is usually my price point for old furniture. $20 and little to no damage other than age. But she was asking $50, and it would need extensive repairs. Not that I was buying it for resale anyway. Honestly, I felt like I was out of mind when I agreed. But the next thing out of my mouth was, "Sure, 50 is great. Can I have someone pick it up in an hour?" Well now, that would be lovely. The edges of the woman's mouth curled into a slow, knowing grin, full of satisfaction, like a cat licking cream from its whiskers. 4 hours, 3 stops, and 2 cups of Java later. I was back home, where Jeff, my boyfriend, not boyfriend, was waiting in front of my driveway with the desk. "Sadie, what were you thinking? This is a piece of junk. Please tell me you got it for free?" he grumbled as I slid out of my Jeep. He leaned against the bed of his truck, arms folded, looking cute, but not happy. "Oh, come on. You can see it has great bones," I said, resting my hand on the side of his face as I stood on my tiptoes and gave him a light kiss. He looked into my eyes, sighed, and wrapped his arms around me. "You owe me," I smiled. "Okay, where do you want this thing?" "Back porch, please. Why don't you go make us something to eat while I do your dirty work?" "You got it," I said with a wink. As I walked up the sidewalk, my stomach sank. The lilacs, so full and lush just hours ago, were dead. Their once vibrant petals had shriveled, decay clinging to them, burnishing the edges with shadow. Even though it felt morbid, I reached out to brush one with my fingertip. It crumbled to dust, carried away on the wind. I had enjoyed them while they lasted, until this morning. Now, an ominous feeling settled in my chest, hauntingly familiar, though I couldn't understand why. The scent had been overwhelming earlier, almost stifling, and while I didn't necessarily want them back, their sudden decay felt oddly personal. 10 minutes later, we sat on the back patio, eating lunch and staring at the desk. I debated whether I should tell him about what I had experienced earlier. We had been seeing each other for about 6 months, and things were going mostly okay. He didn't want to put a label on things, which felt like a little bit of a red flag. But I wanted to see where things went a little longer. He had some great qualities. Only time would tell if they outweighed the rest. I really did want things to progress between us. And they say communication is key. So I decided to tell him. As I told him the story, he ate his chicken salad sandwich and slurped his lemonade, his eyes fixed on me, except for the occasional glance at the desk. When my story was over, he wiped his mouth with one of my daisy-covered napkins, downed the rest of his lemonade, and said, "Well then, Let's get this drawer open. He made quick work of the stuck drawer, and after searching for only a second, found the notch that slid back the false bottom. I couldn't believe it. The false bottom alone was a stretch, but seeing the letter sitting there in real life, insane. I reached into the drawer and picked up the envelope, my hands trembling just as Edith's had, but for different reasons. The paper was aged, its edges rough and slightly brittle. I turned it over, lifted the flap, and slowly pulled out the lilac-colored paper, careful not to damage it. Hauntingly beautiful. It was clearly handmade, bits of lilac petals pressed between its uneven fibers. Should I open it? I glanced at Jeff. He shrugged. That's up to you. I wasn't sure. Edith's eyes had been haunted, and while part of me felt like I was meant to open the letter, another part couldn't shake the sadness in her eyes. It lingered, heavy and unsettling. Still, something pulled at me, urging me to open it. Before I even realized what I was doing, I unfolded the letter, top first, then bottom. One single line stretched across the middle of the page. I wanted to warn you. I was trapped. I am sorry. I read the line again. A wave of dizziness washed over me. I could smell bacon. The room was spinning. My stomach was sick. Somewhere in the distance, Jeff was calling my name, but it was faint, muffled. The air was thick, damp and dank, clinging to my skin like old mildewed laundry, left to long in the wash. I couldn't breathe. I closed my eyes and tried to remember my breathing techniques. In for 5, hold for 4, out for 7. Or was it 8? Damn it. But my slow, deep breaths came out rattled. Reaching for the chair, I sank into it, resting my elbows on the table and my head in my hands. If I could just get my thoughts together. All at once, visions of an entire lifetime slammed into me. Emotions crashed through me, too many to name. I felt joy, then sadness, heard laughter, then a baby's first cry. My baby's first cry? But everything was coated in darkness. I opened my eyes. The lilac-colored paper lay on the desk in front of me, blank. My hand involuntarily moved, picking up a pen from nowhere. My breath was stuck in my throat, as in horror, I watched myself write. I tried to warn you. I was trapped. I am sorry. Sadie, I work all day to put food on this table. You think it's gonna cook itself? Jeff's voice thundered from the top of the staircase, just beyond the door leading into the house. My stomach dropped as a wave of realization hit me so hard I would have fallen if I weren't already sitting. I turned to face the young girl behind me. I already knew she'd be there. My eyes met hers, and I only knew of one way out. With trembling hands and a heart heavy with guilt, I hurriedly stuffed the letter into the envelope. A single tear slipped down my cheek as I whispered, I never should have opened that letter. Just when you think all the weird stuff has been told, the next story will make you think again. See you soon, Claire. You didn't think you could just leave, did you? I've always known where you were. That little bus station in the city, that motel with the flickering sign on the side of the motorway. I was watching you, even then. How you clutch your bag when you sleep. How you leave the TV on static to drown out the sound of your thoughts. You're clever, slippery, but not clever enough. I have to admit, you know how to cover your tracks. But you should know that you can't shake off your own tail. You're not running away from me. You're running toward me. You'll see soon. Sweet dreams. Wow. Creepy. Not sure how you got this address, but congrats, I guess. Nice to know I'm living rent-free in your head. FYI, the bus station smelled like pee, and the motel had roaches. So maybe put your stalking budget toward better accommodations next time. Only, of course, if there is a next time. But I wouldn't get my hopes up if I were you. Also, if you're going to kill me, maybe don't warn me first. That's kind of, I don't know, sloppy. Anyway, I've got to go. I'm going on a hitchhiking date with a guy named Dave. He says he's got a van. Don't worry, I checked, and there's no candy. Best, Claire. Pants on. Dave has a record. 2 assaults. 1 missing person case. You're not as sharp as you think. Do you know how easy it would be for me to get to you? To pull you from that van before Dave even knows what's happening? The door's unlocked. Sleep tight. Very funny. Except you can't be outside because I'm writing this from the bathroom at a gas station. And I'm pretty sure the only person outside is the clerk on his smoke break. Unless you've taken up vaping? Mint flavored, I hope. But seriously, do you actually think this whole mysterious stalker act is working? Because from where I'm sitting, on a suspiciously sticky toilet seat, by the way, you owe me for that. You sound kind of desperate, following me across 3 states, tracking my every move, writing me these cryptic little notes like some kind of B-list Bond villain. Feels like a lot of effort for someone who insists they're the one in control. And if you know so much, if you've been watching me this whole time, tell me this. Why am I running? Seriously. Enlighten me. You should know why, unless you don't, which would mean you're not half as smart as you think you are. I need to stop writing now, since someone's knocking on the stall door, and I don't feel like explaining why I've been loitering in the bathroom with a notepad. Best, Claire. You're running because you're scared, but not of me. The thing you're running from is already in the room with you. Turn around. I think you've got this whole dynamic twisted. You think I'm scared of you? Cute. You've been following me, sure. But have you noticed the trail of bodies in my wake? Dave made it exactly 27 miles before he swerved into a ditch. Poor guy. Guess he shouldn't have tried to pull that knife. The clerk at the gas station. You'll see his face on the news soon. Well, most of it. So yeah, maybe I'm running, but not from you. You're not hunting me. I'm hunting you. See you soon. Interesting. You always were a quick study. I underestimated you. My mistake. But you're wrong about one thing. I'm not hunting you anymore. I'm inviting you. There's a cabin in the woods, just outside the circus. Red door, broken window. I'll leave the door unlocked. If you're as brave as you think you are, come find me. Or maybe I'll find you first. By circa, you mean the festival extravaganza, right? Cute. I'll bring wine. And maybe a shovel. See you soon, Claire. Yeah, I knew you'd come. I saw you the second you stepped into the woods. That red jacket of yours stands out in the dark like a beacon. You really should have chosen something less noticeable, or maybe you wanted me to see you. Either way, you're here now. I left a present for you. I thought I might as well give you a chance. The knife I pinned this letter down with is all yours. I trust you know how to use it. Do you feel it? The cold sinking into your bones? The silence pressing down on you? That sound behind you? The snap of a branch? That wasn't an animal. You've been so clever up to this point. So slippery. So sharp. But even the smartest prey makes a mistake eventually. And you've just made yours. Don't bother running. I'm already behind you. You're right. I felt you the moment I crossed the tree line. I knew you were there. I could almost hear your breathing. Shallow, controlled, waiting. But you made a mistake, too. You let me get too close. I know it's rude. But I'm going to have to return you kind gift. A girl can't have too many of a good thing, or it gets boring. I felt the heat of your breath on the back of my neck, and I smiled, because I'm not scared of you anymore. Not that I ever was, and you'll never get the chance to write me again. Clever girl, but not clever enough. See you soon. An incident report. Missing person. Claire Marie Jenkins. Location. Isolated cabin. Festival extravaganza. Details. The cabin was found empty upon arrival. Blood splatters were present, but no bodies recovered. Signs of struggle. One broken window. Unidentified footprints lead into the woods. No return tracks. A single sheet of paper was discovered, pinned to the cabin wall with a knife. It read, "Not yet. Claire is presently missing at time of report. Background checks show that she must have changed her identity. Or she didn't have any family, immediate or extended. Case remains open." The above story is ended. Let's listen to the next story. The Whisper in the City. The dark skeletons of skyscrapers stretched into the twilight sky. I trudged along an empty street, my feet dragging through the damp sand, leaving deep grooves behind me. How long had I been here? I couldn't tell. The overcast horizon was slowly growing lighter, the mist thinning with each passing moment. The street seemed familiar to me, but any landmarks that might have been here before were completely effaced now. Everything around me was falling apart, disintegrating into sand that covered every inch of the ground. Suddenly, a soft, faint whisper came from somewhere in the distance. I couldn't remember the last time I'd seen anyone else in this desolate place, so I shuffled toward the sound. The voice came again, this time a little closer and more insistent, but I still couldn't make out the words or pinpoint where it was coming from. I tried to pick up my pace, but the sand was dense and viscous between my toes. The whisper kept calling, getting clearer, as though someone was tuning a radio. It was soothing, but firm. I sensed it wished me no harm, at least as long as I did what it told me to. Finally, I understood what it was saying. "Come on, just a little bit further," the voice urged. It seemed like it was coming from a building to my right. I stared into the shadows in the gaping doorway that led into a dark hall. Nobody was there. I caught a reflection in one of the grimy shards of glass jutting from a window frame. Was it me? It couldn't be. How could I be this old and shriveled? I turned away and wandered toward the low horizon. "We need to get ready. Somebody is coming," the voice called from up ahead. A warm rain suddenly began to fall. It frothed in my hair and trickled down my cheeks. The air filled with a strange scent, something fresh and sweet. It didn't seem right. Rain shouldn't smell like that. The voice kept coaxing me forward, and I kept on wading through fragrant sheets of rain, my feet squelching in the soggy sand. After a while, the rain stopped, and the sky cleared a little, though the sun was still hidden behind the thick veil of clouds. The lukewarm mist curled around every turn, filling the streets that branched out from the crossroads I passed. If only it were clear enough to see what lay in the distance. Maybe then I could remember. Just as I reached the next junction, the whisper gave me a new command. "All right, let's get something to eat. Come on now. Turn here." I looked from side to side. Across the road to my left stood the remains of a diner. I plodded toward the building through the endless sand. I thought there couldn't possibly be anything to eat here, but as I stumbled over the threshold, I caught a whiff of toast and coffee. The diner was as decayed as everything else in this city. There was less sand inside than on the street, but it still covered the floor with an even layer. The display counter stood empty, the glass shattered. Here and there, overturned furniture lay scattered across the ground. The upholstery on the chairs and benches had rotted away a long time ago. The cup-shaped clock on the wall was missing its hands. Decay, dust, and sand. There was no one inside. Still, I heard muted whispers coming from every corner, buzzing like cicadas on a summer night. I moved through the room, trying to make out what the voices were saying. But there were just too many of them now. I shuffled through the jumbled chairs and tables to the center of the room. Here, on one of the tables, sat a plate of food and a cup of coffee. My stomach rumbled. There were no utensils, so I grabbed the food with my hands, stuffing it into my mouth. The toast was crunchy on the outside and soft on the inside. The omelet was fluffy and creamy. The coffee was strong and sweet. How long had it been since I had last eaten anything? I wasn't sure. It felt like ages. Suddenly, the air around me shimmered as though in a heat haze. The dilapidated diner faded away, and I found myself in a warm, sunlit kitchen. Light wood furniture, a crisp tablecloth, plates with delicate flower patterns on the rim. A woman stood in front of the stove. Her hair fell in neat waves, and she wore a light blue fit and flare dress. She turned to me and smiled. "Georgie, would you like another piece of toast?" she asked. Was she talking to me? Was that my name? I wanted to ask her what was going on, but before I could find the words, the mirage disappeared. I was back in the decaying diner, an empty plate before me. "Okay, George, you're done? Let's go now," the whisper cooed. I followed the voice back into the street. It kept urging me forward with its bright, incessant tone. Well, at least now I knew my name. But all the other questions still whirled in my head. What did the voice want from me? Where was I going? How long had I been here? Who was I? Really, it felt like this mess in my head would boil over, washing away all this dirty sand and all the debris of this dead city. I gritted my teeth, clenched my fists, and plowed forward. At last, the road led me to a park. Patches of grass poked through the sand. The trees, covered in yellow and red leaves, peeked through the fog, taunting me. A path lined with benches led into the mist. All right, let's sit down here. I settled onto the nearest bench. Quiet fragments of music fluttered to me from somewhere far away. The sound was comforting, familiar. The voice hummed around me for a moment before fading into the background. The music grew louder and steadier. I thought I recognized the melody, but couldn't quite put my finger on it. It reminded me of someone I used to miss. I sat alone, enveloped by the soothing blanket of music, staring at the colorful trees before me. Bit by bit, my angst and frustration melted away. After a while, I heard the whispers again. The voice that had been guiding me was talking to somebody else now. The new voice seemed familiar, like I'd heard it sometime long ago, in another life. I felt a movement in the air beside me. Someone touched my hand. "Dad? Dad, it's me." "Chad." The small room was tidy and clean. as nice as a room in such a facility could be. The curtains were open, and you could see a small park colored in gold and red by the approaching cold. An old jazz standard was flowing from the player in the corner. A woman sat on a stool beside an armchair where an old, frail man rested. She held his hand. "I'm sorry, Miss Ross. He's not having a good day today," a nurse said gently from behind the armchair. To be honest, they're few and far between now, and it's hard to say how many more he'll have. I know, but it's still so hard. It's like he's wandering further and further away, the woman said, wiping the corner of her eye. Dad, it's Katie. I'm here." His dry, thin fingers tightened around hers. The next story will begin now. The Quiet Witness. Ava Winter had always been defined by her words. They were her weapon, her shield, her very identity. As a journalist, she had built her career on exposing truths hidden beneath layers of deceit. Her voice, steady, compelling, unmistakable, had won her awards and opened doors to places most people could only dream of. But now it was gone. How did this happen to me? She wondered, her eyes tracing the blank walls of her small, lifeless apartment. Each morning felt like waking into a nightmare she couldn't escape. For 6 months, she had tried to piece together the shattered fragments of her existence, but nothing seemed to fit. How could she move forward when the very thing that had defined her, her voice, was lost? I used to fill rooms with my words. Now, I can't even manage a whisper. Her friends had stopped calling within weeks, unsure of how to navigate the silence that now consumed her life. Ava understood, but their absence still stung. Who wants to sit in awkward silence with someone who was once the loudest in the room? Bitterness coiled through her thoughts, uninvited but persistent. Morning light seeped through the blinds, casting faint, pale stripes across the apartment's barren walls. The fragile glow barely softened the dullness that enveloped her. Her once crowded bookshelves, filled with dog-eared biographies and neatly stacked notebooks, now stood half empty. Their contents were crammed haphazardly into boxes scattered across the floor, a reflection of the disarray in her heart. Her fingers drifted to the edge of the nightstand, brushing against its surface as she reached for her phone. She froze mid-motion at the sight of the blank screen. No texts, no missed calls, no one left to call anyway, she thought, the sharp ache of loneliness settling heavily in her chest. In her loneliest moments, Ava turned to her journal. Her pen flew across the pages, spilling out the thoughts she could no longer voice. At first, the words felt hollow, like whispers of a life slipping further from her grasp. But over time, they became her anchor, a fragile thread connecting her to the person she once was. Her gaze often drifted to a framed photo teetering on the edge of the bookshelf. taken 2 years earlier. It captured a time when her life brimmed with purpose. Her byline had graced the city's most prominent publications, her career thriving. In the photo, she stood on a balcony overlooking the bustling downtown streets, microphone in hand, laughing with unrestrained joy. The memory clawed at her heart. I used to own every room I walked into. Now, I'm trapped in this one, swallowing me whole. Ava's fingers grazed the leather-bound journal, resting on her desk. She flipped it open, watching as the transformation unfolded before her eyes. Once neatly penned entries filled with hopeful plans and promises had turned into chaotic scribbles and unfinished thoughts. The journal had become more than a daily ritual. It was her lifeline, a fragile thread connecting her to a reality she feared was slipping away. Even as she poured her thoughts onto its pages, the oppressive stillness of the room closed in around her, heavy and stifling. Tightening her grip on the pen, she thought, how did this happen to me? With deliberate strokes, she scrawled 2 words across the page. Still here. She stared at them, letting the silence stretch, their uncertain and resolute meaning. The park had become her only refuge from the stifling walls of her apartment. She appreciated how the trees muffled the city's constant noise, providing a space where the silence felt peaceful rather than overwhelming. The biting winter air stung her cheeks as she wandered along the familiar path, her boots crunching over frost-covered grass. Skeletal trees creaked softly in the wind, their shadows reaching across the ground like long fingers. Tightening her scarf against the cold, the rough wool grazing her skin, Ava was about to head home when she noticed them. Near the frozen lake, 2 figures stood silhouetted against the faint glow of a nearby lamppost. At first glance, Ava assumed they were lovers, drawn to the romance of the icy night. But as she moved closer, the scene shifted. The mask loomed over the woman, his movements sharp and aggressive, cutting through the stillness like a blade. The woman shrank back, arms crossed tightly, her posture tense and defensive. Ava froze, her breath crystallizing in the frigid air as unease coiled tightly in her chest. Her heart thudded as she squinted into the darkness, trying to make sense of the scene. The woman tilted her head slightly, her voice, if she spoke, too faint to rise above the biting wind. Ava hesitated, her feet faltering as the weight of the stillness pressed down around her, heavy and foreboding. It's not my business, Ava told herself, her stomach twisting uneasily. Despite the thought, her feet carried her forward. Almost automatically, she slipped off the path, her boots sinking into the frozen grass as she ducked behind a tree. Gripping its rough bark with trembling fingers, she peered out from the shadows, her pulse quickening. The man's sharp, angry voice sliced through the icy stillness, though the wind scattered his words before they could reach her fully. Ava squinted into the dim light. The woman stood rigid, her arms crossed tightly, her posture defensive, her responses, soft and hesitant, were little more than fragments that dissolved in the biting wind. Ava's chest tightened. Something's wrong. Do something. But what? I can't even. Her thoughts shattered as the man lunged, shoving the woman with brutal force. Ava's breath caught as the woman slipped on the ice. For one excruciating moment, time seemed to stop. The air stood still, the world eerily frozen, until the fragile frost beneath the woman cracked. The sound was sharp and jarring, like breaking glass. A splash shattered the silence as the woman disappeared into the frigid, dark water. Panic surged through Ava like a tidal wave. Scream. Call for help. Do something, she begged herself, but her voice refused to come, locked deep within the recesses of her mind. Desperation set in as her shaking hands fumbled in her pocket. After a frantic struggle, she pulled out her phone and hit the record button, her fingers trembling against the icy metal. Then he turned. The man's head snapped toward her, and their gazes locked with unnerving precision. There, in the dim light, Ava felt the intensity of his stare, piercing, calculated, and merciless. It cut through the darkness, striking at the core of her fear. Her stomach clenched with unease. He sees me. He knows, I saw. He stepped toward her, his boots crunching loudly on the frosted ground. Ava didn't wait to see what would come next. Her legs jolted into motion, slipping and sliding as she bolted back toward the path. Her breaths came in short, ragged bursts, her heart pounding like a frantic drumbeat as the icy air seared her lungs. Later, Ava sat at her desk, staring at the blurry video looping on her laptop screen. Barely 10 seconds long, the shaky footage revealed almost nothing. The man's face was lost in a haze, and the woman's fall disappeared into the shadows. It's not enough, she thought bitterly, frustration coiling in her stomach like a spring. Clenching her fists tightly, she replayed the scene again. I saw it happen. I know what I saw. Why isn't that enough? She had gone to the police, but their skepticism had been palpable. Unable to speak, Ava resorted to scribbling frantic notes, pointing at her phone and gesturing in sheer desperation. Yet her efforts were met with dismissive questions. Why hadn't she called for help? Why was the video so unclear? Did she even know the people involved? By the end of the interview, Ava felt like the one under suspicion, the weight of their doubts pressing heavily on her. Back in her apartment, anger simmered beneath the surface. Her notepad lay open on the cluttered desk, its pages littered with hastily scrawled thoughts and disjointed leads. As she tapped her pen against the edge of the desk, the scene replayed vividly in her mind. How could they dismiss it so quickly? She thought, her chest tightening. You were there. You saw it. Isn't that enough? But the memory of the detective's dismissive tone echoed, fueling the frustration building inside her. Ava slammed the notepad shut. This is why I became a journalist. To expose people like him. To give a voice to the powerless. And now, I'm the one without a voice. Her laptop screen flickered. The video paused on the shadowy outline of the man by the frozen lake. No features, no clarity. Just darkness. Ava clenched her fists, biting back the doubt, gnawing at her resolve. Not enough, she thought bitterly, as she grabbed her pen and scrawled the words across her notepad with such force that the paper tore. Her hands trembled as the detective's words replayed in her mind. A blurry video isn't much to go on. Without more, there's not much we can do. Tears prickled her eyes. They think I'm delusional. They think I imagined it all. Helpless. Powerless. She swallowed hard, her throat tightening. You're not helpless. You've never been helpless. Her reflection in the window caught her eye, tense and weary. She leaned against the wall, inhaling deeply, her fists still clenched. This is why you don't quit, she reminded herself. Because people like him can't get away with this. You can't let them win. A sharp chime from her computer broke the heavy stillness. Crossing the room, Ava froze when she saw the sender's name. Lucas. Her breath hitched. A flicker of something she hadn't felt in months breaking through the haze. Hope. His response was brief, but direct. And it ignited something in her. You're not doing this alone anymore. Lucas had been there during her prime. One of the few who understood her dogged pursuit of the truth. Now, he was ready to help. Together, they began unraveling Victor Hayes's carefully concealed life. Corruption, intimidation, a pattern of calculated violence cloaked behind a polished facade. Each new revelation strengthened Ava's resolve. She stared at a photo of one of Victor's previous victims, her fingers gripping its edges. He's done this before, and no one stopped him. That changes now. Memories flickered like faint echoes. Raised voices, papers scattered across a desk, a room cloaked in shadow. Ava pressed her hands to her temples, trying to grasp the elusive fragments. Think. What did you see? What did you hear? But the harder she tried, the more the details seemed to slip through her fingers, like grains of sand. Still, one truth emerged from the fog. The night you lost your voice wasn't random. It's tied to all of this. It's tied to him. With Lucas's help, Ava tracked down an old source, a woman who had once worked closely with Victor. They met in a quiet cafe where the soft murmur of conversation only heightened the tension between them. The cafe's low buzz and clatter of mugs softened, fading beneath the chaos in Ava's mind. She gripped her notepad, knuckles white, as her gaze darted between the woman's trembling hands and the window she wouldn't stop watching. Across the table, the woman stirred her tea with deliberate slowness, her hands trembling faintly despite the blank mask on her face. "You don't understand yet," she murmured, her voice tight and low. Her eyes flicked to the window, watching it intently, as if expecting someone to burst in. "But you will soon." Ava's stomach churned, tightening painfully. Her pulse hammered in her ears, drowning out the comforting hum of the cafe. Slowly, she picked up her notepad from the table and scribbled a question. She slid it toward the woman, her hand steady despite her pounding heart. "What do you mean?" she'd written. The woman leaned closer, her face now inches from Ava's, her gaze piercing and intense. Ava shifted in her seat, the unease tightening its grip. "I shouldn't be here," the woman whispered, her breath quick and unsteady. "They'll know I've talked." Her words landed heavily in Ava's chest, leaving her breathless. Her fingers twitched, reaching for a steadiness she couldn't find. Slowly, she picked up her notepad and wrote the question with deliberate strokes. She held it up, her eyes locking with the woman's. "Why me?" The woman hesitated, her hands fidgeting with the edges of her napkin, tearing it into frayed strips. She glanced at Ava, guilt and resignation flickering in her eyes, before quickly looking away. Her trembling hands gripped her cup, her voice shaky as she spoke. Ava studied her closely, her pen gliding across the page. "Look at her. She's scared, just like you were, just like so many others. But she's here. She's talking. That means something." Lucas asked the questions Ava couldn't, drawing out details she hadn't dared to hope for. By the end, the truth was undeniable. Victor's immaculate public image was a facade upheld by manipulation and fear. Ava stared at her notes, her breath hitching, as her eyes landed on the name scrawled in the corner of an earlier entry. Victor Hayes. With measured movements, she wrote on her notepad and slid it toward Lucas. "We need to meet him." Lucas read the words, his jaw tightening before he nodded. "We'll choose a location where he won't feel entirely in control," he said, his voice low and deliberate. Turning to the woman, he added, "Thank you. You've done more than you know." The woman nodded faintly, her hands gripping her cup. Ava's heart pounded as she absorbed the gravity of what lay ahead. Meeting Victor meant stepping directly into the fire. But it was the only way forward, the only way to bring the truth to light. Her resolve sharpened as she scribbled on the notepad once more. "We need to confront him." Lucas glanced at her words and nodded resolutely. "If we're doing this, we have to be strategic. We need neutral ground, somewhere he'll come but won't own." The theater was his idea. "It's neutral ground," he said. "Somewhere he'll come, but not somewhere he'll own." Ava wasn't convinced. What if he doesn't show? She'd written on the pad between them, her pen pressing into the paper with doubt. "He will," Lucas had replied, leaning closer, his voice steady. "He'll want to see the pieces for himself. He can't resist thinking he can still control the outcome." And so, the message was sent, its contents carefully constructed to lure Victor out. The stage was set, both figuratively and literally, for the confrontation that Ava knew could change everything. Now, as she stood in the hollow shell of the theater, its grand interior reduced to shadows and decay, the weight of that choice settled heavily on her. Dust motes danced in the dim light streaming through cracked windows, and the faint creak of old floorboards echoed in the cavernous emptiness. Her evidence was meticulously laid out before her on the stage, each piece feeling like a fragile lifeline, a thread connecting her to the truth. And then, the sound of polished shoes clicking against the floor broke the stillness. Each step deliberate, each echo sharper than the last. Victor Hayes emerged from the shadows at the back of the theater, his presence filling the room before he even reached the stage. He stopped a few feet away, the cool glint in his eyes pinning Ava in place. His suit, pristine and unyielding, seemed to mirror his demeanor. Impeccable, yet menacing. "You should have stayed quiet," Victor said. His voice was soft, almost conversational, but the menace beneath it rippled like a storm just beneath the surface. Ava's breath caught, her fingers curling at her sides as she steadied herself. The weight of his presence was suffocating, but she forced herself to meet his gaze, refusing to look away. Inside, her thoughts sharpened, cutting through the fear. "I don't need a voice to bring you down. My story is louder than you'll ever be." Victor's smile was faint, more an indication of control than amusement. "This," he said, gesturing to the evidence before her with a flick of his hand, "isn't going to change anything. You think you've won, but you don't understand how the game works." Lucas stepped forward, breaking the tension momentarily, as he began presenting the truth piece by piece. His voice was firm and steady, and for the first time, Ava saw Victor's polished exterior begin to fracture. His jaw tightened, his eyes narrowing ever so slightly as each revelation chipped away at his armor. "You don't understand what you're doing," Victor said finally, his tone cutting and sharp now. You think justice is on your side. You're in over your head. But Ava didn't flinch. As the cracks in Victor's facade grew, a strange calm settled over her. Her silence, once a source of despair and weakness, now felt like an unassailable wall. This was the moment she had fought for. The truth was out, and it was louder than anything Victor could say or do. She stood taller, her composure unbroken. This is it. This is why you fought so hard. This is what they can't take from you, she thought, the strength in her resolve radiating outward. Victor stepped back, the calculated anger in his eyes barely contained. For the first time, it was clear. He wasn't in control anymore. And Ava, with her silence and the undeniable power of truth, had turned the tide. She had proven that even without words, her voice could echo louder than his threats ever could. Haunting, Jack couldn't speak. He could only scream as he woke up to the sound of his mother's voice, whispering to him from the corner of his dark bedroom. Of course, it wasn't actually his mother. He knew that. How could it be, when she had died in a car accident just a little over a week earlier? Jack. Come over here, Jack. You can see me, can't you? Come over here, child. His chest was heavy, his bladder loose with fear. Looking over into the corner as he flailed amidst his perspiration-damp sheets, he realized that he could indeed see something. The same something, in fact, that he had seen on that terrible night of his mum's demise, just minutes after his aunt, who had been babysitting him at the time, had received the phone call that would cause both of their worlds to come crashing down. She had broken the news to him, and he had seen it standing over by the window of his aunt's tiny living room. It had been at the funeral, too. And now, here it was again, invading the privacy of his bedroom this time, lurking in the corner, watching him, taunting him by speaking with his dead mother's voice. Jack! Come here, Jack! Now! Tears of terror spilled down his cheeks as he scrambled to sit up. His gaze was fixed upon the corner, on the hulking, dark outline of a man who stood there, wide and tall, so tall that its head almost brushed the ceiling. It had no face, no features. It was only visible because somehow it was even blacker than the darkness itself which suffused the room. Blacker than the very night. How could that be? His screams tapered off as his throat constricted. From elsewhere in the house, he could hear the sound of frantic movements. His aunt had clearly been roused by his yells. Her footsteps raced across the landing, old floorboards groaning loudly. I'll return, Jack. You can't avoid me forever. His mother's voice hissed quietly. The thing then scuttled, spider-like, across to the wall, and then through it, as though no barrier existed at all, as though the laws of physical matter simply did not matter to it one bit. The thing disappeared from his sight just as the bedroom door was flung open and the light snapped on to dazzle him with its bright glare. Jack, Jack, are you all right? His Aunt Alice stood there, looking pale and startled. Her resemblance to his mum, as always these days, struck him like a dagger through the heart. They had the same raven hair, just as he did himself, the same ice blue eyes, same sharp cheekbones, same thin lips. His mother's now stilled forever, whilst his aunt's were pinched in a worried frown as she approached the bed where he lay. Sweetheart, what is it? Did you have a bad dream? He shook his head. It was bad, all right, but it was no dream. He raised a trembling hand to point over at the corner where the thing had been standing, mocking him by its mimicking of his dead mother's voice as it tried to lure him in. Alice turned to look, but quickly brought her attention back to him. There's nothing there, Jack. You just had a nightmare, that's all. Her gaze shifted, moving down over his sheets, where a damp stain alerted him also to the fact that he must have wet himself. He cringed, the tears coursing faster down his cold cheeks. What kind of a 12-year-old wet the bed? It's all right, his aunt soothed. I'll get those in the wash, and you can come and sleep with me in my bed for the rest of the night. It'll be dawn in a couple of hours anyway. And so saying, she ushered him out of his bed and took his hand to lead him over to her room. As always, it smelled strongly of lavender. After tucking him in, she retreated back to strip the damp sheets from his bed. Meanwhile, he lay there, alone once more in the darkness, eyes wide open and frantically scanning the dark shapes all around him, lest the shadow should return again that night to torment him. All the while, the sound of his aunt's stifled sobs haunted his ears. Chanta, Abby, if you can hear me, please respond. I don't know what to do. He hasn't spoken a word since you died, and he seems so disturbed. He's been having night terrors, and Jack crept down the stairs, being careful to avoid the creaking steps. His skin was crawling, body covered in goosebumps, not from the cold, but from a renewed sense of fear. Peering over the banister, he saw his aunt in the living room. She was sitting with her back to him, cross-legged on the floor beside the coffee table. On the table itself, right in front of her, was a board, a wooden board with letters and numbers on its surface, the exact same kind of board as he remembered seeing his mother messing around with so many times before, late in the evenings after she'd had a bottle of wine. Abby, are you here with us? Please, Jan. He wanted to run down the remainder of the steps, grab that board, and smash it to pieces, or burn it to ashes. For there was something about it that just seemed so very, very wrong. He was stopped in his tracks, however, by a sudden, sharp gasp from his aunt. She had her fingers resting on top of a small, circular piece of glass, which rested atop the board. And as he watched, the piece of glass slid free of Alice's grip and went spinning away, clearly moving of its own volition. It raced in jagged lines all across the board. Jack felt dizzy at what he was seeing. His legs gave way beneath him as he sank down onto one of the steps, his buttocks slamming painfully hard against the bare wood. Candlelight leapt in the room before him, the multiple flames flickering wildly. A muffled groan rumbled deep in his chest. Alice did not turn around. She was far too intent upon whatever message was being spelled out to hear him. He watched as she snatched up a nearby notebook and pen, scribbling frantically as she noted down what she was seeing reveal itself before her, never taking her eyes off the board. Eventually, the glass fell still. Something stirred in the air. The candle stuttered. His aunt gave a shiver, and Jack watched as the shadow man emerged through the closed door into the kitchen, moving to stand right beside Alice, reaching out with one of its thick arms as though to touch her. Another gust of wind blew through the room, carrying on it the stench of something rotting. Unable to take it anymore, Jack scrambled to his feet and ran back up the stairs. He cowered in his aunt's bed, covers pulled up over his head. As in the room below, he heard her begin to scream. The above story ends, but never stops. Here is another story that will not disappoint you. Foreboding. It was all too much, really. The woman and the boy dragged their tired legs through the deep snow. Ahead of them, far off in the distance, lay the undulating, snow-covered hills where the log cabin they were heading for had been built many years previously. The two could picture in their minds a blazing fire and hot chocolate with little marshmallows floating on the surface, and it was this that kept them going. The boy, a young teenager, often had to support the woman and help her across fallen trees that hampered their progress. The woman was exhausted, and every few minutes she stopped, leaning heavily over her knees, trying desperately to catch her breath. The boy stopped with her every time, but his eyes kept traveling anxiously across the vast expanse of land they had to cross to reach their goal. Being younger and fitter, he didn't need as many breaks as the woman did, but he never complained. It was more important for him to bring the woman back alive than to force her to walk faster. They set off again, the woman hanging on to the boy's arm. The surface underneath them suddenly turned slippery. They had reached the frozen lake finally. There was still a long way to go, but at least there were no hills or fallen trees to navigate. The woman stopped again. Her breathing was labored, and she had trouble drawing a deep enough breath to regain some strength. She was crying from the exhaustion. The boy knelt down and held her. His face was worried and concerned. His hands shook somewhat as he gently patted the woman's back. A man walked past in a sideways manner, like a crab. He waved at the pair and smiled. The woman stretched out a hand towards the man, imploringly, and the boy gave him a surly look. But the man just smiled again and continued through the deep snow. He wore only one snowshoe, which explained his strange gait, but it didn't seem to hamper his progress. He flattened the snow with his snowshoe-clad foot and hardly sunk through the snow at all with the other foot. The woman looked at the flattened snow and then looked up at the boy. He smiled at her. At least there would now be an easier path for them to use. The woman straightened up and, sensing renewed vigor, pulled the boy to his feet. They hugged, took each other's hand, and started walking again. Ahead of them, the man continued his crab walk, humming a monotonous tune that sounded more like a low rumble than anything else. He turned his head, saw them walking behind him, and motioned for them to follow, nodding his head encouragingly. As the man forged ahead in front of them, the distance between them and him grew. The man was walking unnaturally fast, considering the conditions and his unconventional gait, and the boy grew anxious. He tried to walk faster to keep up, and the distance between him and the woman increased unrelentingly. She called his name, but he seemed oblivious. He had his eyes firmly on the man, who was now barely visible far ahead of them, and did not stop when the woman needed a break again. She called him feebly, but she had no strength to raise her voice. She cried again, cursing her tired legs and laboring lungs. Once more, she bent over her knees, trying to catch her breath. She wanted to scream. She wanted to beg the boy to wait, but no words could be heard. A flutter on the wind, a change in the vibrations another human being causes when they disturb the airflow, caused her to look up. The boy was no longer visible from her vantage point, bent double over her knees. She straightened up quickly, her heart beating faster. Where was the boy? Squinting to look in front of her, she suddenly saw his head pop up, arms flailing, and then disappear again. Her heart fell into her stomach. He had gone through the ice. Finding a strength she didn't know she had, the woman ran. The snow was deep and felt like syrup. She screamed in frustration and then called the boy's name. As she got closer, she slowed down, walking fast but carefully towards the boy. He was bobbing up and down again, waving his arms, but he made no sound. The cold water had robbed him of his voice, and his open mouth, so poignant in his horrified face, only mimicked the sound he was trying to make. Suddenly, he disappeared again, and only his hand was sticking up over the snow. The woman, no longer trying to be cautious, threw herself down on the ice and found his hand. Seconds before, it would have disappeared under the water. She felt the boy grabbing the hand, and she pulled, the adrenaline and fear giving her more strength than she had ever had before. The boy's head appeared again. He looked straight at the woman, and there was a panic in his eyes that scared her more than anything else. She noticed that there wasn't much room for his head, and with a jolt of fear, she realized the fissure in the ice was closing up, and fast. The boy's head disappeared under the water again, despite her holding on to his hand, and the hole kept closing. Now, there was no way the boy could get his head through the hole to draw breath again, and she screamed in fear and panic. With her free hand, she started pounding on the ice around the hole. The ice was too hard, and her frail beating could not even chip away at the surface. Keeping a firm hold on the hand that still gripped hers convulsively, she tried bashing a hole in the ice with the heel of one boot, but the ice would not even crack. The boy's hand started losing its grip on her hand, and she wailed in desperation, stomping harder on the ice, standing up to add weight to the pounding on the ice. She lost her grip on the boy's hand, and it slipped below the water, the hole finally closing inexorably around it with a sucking sound. Far away from the location in her dream, the woman woke up sobbing, sweat moistening her forehead, and shaking from head to toe. A pain in her chest so intense it brought tears to her eyes. The woman tried taking a deep breath. She was moaning, and her heart was beating so rapidly it hurt. Next to her, her husband was snoring loudly, completely oblivious to her plight. This was nothing new. It would more than likely take an earthquake to wake him up at this hour, and she didn't need him anyway. She gently pushed the blankets aside and slipped out of bed. She had to make sure he was safe. The dream had been so vivid, so real. Tiptoeing across the hall, shivering slightly in the cold night air that permeated the house, she arrived in her older son's bedroom. A soft snoring could be heard from the room. As she neared, a quiet meow greeted her. Looking into the room, the lamp-like eyes of their cat Brandy were staring back at her, and the animal meowed quietly again. Letting her breath out, she hadn't even been aware of holding it. She tiptoed over to stroke the cat gently. "Good girl, you stay with him. Keep him safe for me." Looking down upon her teenage son, his mouth open and his wavy hair in disarray, around his peaceful face. She felt her throat constrict slightly, and she had to swallow hard to stifle the moan that had almost escaped her mouth again. The dream was still so alive in her mind, and the sense of foreboding was making her eyes water, her chest aching so much she was afraid it would burst open, wanting desperately to wake him up just to hold him. She instead stretched her hand out, stroking her son's forehead gently before retreating out into the hall again. Feeling compelled to check on her younger son as well, she continued down the hall to the third bedroom. He was sleeping on top of his covers, his little thumb securely lodged in his mouth. She could tell he was cold as he was curled up in a fetal position, and she carefully tugged the blanket out from under him, covering his little body and tucking it in around the sides of the bed. There was no point in going back to bed now. She was wide awake, and in less than an hour and a half, she would have to be up to help the kids get ready for school. She tiptoed past her husband, still in his bed, snoring loudly, to grab her bathrobe, and then snuck downstairs to make a cup of tea. Sunlight was forcing its way into her kitchen when she arrived back downstairs, penetrating dusty corners and pushing through a curtain of tiny dust particles that had been stirred up as she grabbed a tea towel to wipe the cup. And she sat down at the kitchen table, carefully sipping a steaming cup of Earl Grey. She still felt cold inside, shivering slightly, even as the warm liquid made its way to her empty stomach. The image of her son's head disappearing under the ice in her dream, still so clear in her mind, it was making her shake her head repeatedly, as if to rid herself of an annoying fly. She was wringing her hands, moaning quietly every time she saw the hand disappearing under the ice in her mind's eye. Would she ever be able to forget this dream? Little tiny clicks on the kitchen floor told her that Brandy had decided to join her in the kitchen. The cat looked up at the woman as she rounded the kitchen island on her way to her food bowl, but seemed entirely intent on wanting to satisfy her hunger for food before satisfying other needs, such as attention from her human owner. And she beat her regular path right over to her food bowl without stopping. The bowl was empty, accusing feline eyes locked into hers. Brandy sat down, looked back at her bowl, and then up again at the woman. It was obvious that the cat was asking for food, but the woman, who was still feeling faint from her nightmare, seemed oblivious. A soft meow mingled with a purr escaped the tiny mouth as the cat stood back up again and sauntered over. Wrapping herself around the human legs, she began a relentless meowing until the woman finally surrendered and got up off her chair to feed the cat. That's when she saw it. Next to the canister where they kept the cat's food, there was a pile of unopened and unchecked mail from the day before. On the top, underneath a blue envelope, apparently sent out by Publishers Clearinghouse, she was probably about to win $5,000 a week for life, was something white. She realized that she was looking at a picture of snow, and with trepidation and horrific foreboding, she pulled the catalog out from under the envelope. It was a magazine on vacation cottages in northern Maine. Her husband had been canvassing for this vacation for months and had obviously ordered the catalog. And on the front was a picture of a rustic-looking cabin with snow drifts lapping the windows. In the background, a frozen lake could be seen. The woman caught her breath and felt her knees buckle. Next to the cabin, locking eyes with her from the picture, stood the man from her dream, smiling benignly, holding his hand out towards the cottage. In his other hand, he was holding one snowshoe. Mercifully, darkness enveloped her, and she escaped. For a while. It was all too much, really. The hunt never ends. You thought that we wouldn't find out, didn't you? The note read. The man had shivered when he had read those ominous words, as perspiration began to drip down from his temple, the salty liquid seeping into his eyes and temporarily blinding him. "This is the end," the man had said to himself in an agitated, trembling whisper as he looked down at the sheet of notepaper which had been left on his office desk. He glanced around at the other employees to see if anyone was looking his way, giving him some indication on who had left the message. But all of them were engaged in their own little world of toting up the facts and figures which were constantly coming through on their computer terminals. What had caused this man to turn deathly white and feel so nauseous? How had those 9 little words on the page that had now turned his world completely upside down come to cause him so much anguish and despair? That unhappy event had happened a week before. So let us now find out what had caused this man, Henry Miller, to end up in this now distressing location where he now found himself. At this moment, he was looking between the slats of a Venetian blind, observing the street outside, and trying as best as he could to remain unseen from the road in front of the building, where he now cringed, frightened out of his wits. How had it come to this? He thought. Last week, he didn't have a care in the world. All was going well at work. And then came that note, and he found himself involved in something that had instantly changed his life. And now he was on the run, constantly looking over his shoulder, and at this moment hiding in this abandoned building, a structure that had a large sign outside stating that it was condemned and would shortly be torn down. So, how long could he remain here before he had to find another place of sanctuary? The year is 1948. The war is over. After 6 years of bloodshed and butchery by a psychopath and his evil, willing collaborators, during which an estimated 80 to 100 million people had died or been murdered. The Nuremberg trials had finished, and many, many hundreds of German Nazi war criminals had found justice on the end of a rope for crimes against humanity. Then, there were some who had decided that a cyanide pill was a much quicker way to escape the noose of retribution. Others, seeing that the end was near, had made their getaway before the Russians entered Berlin and tortured them, finding their way to South America, where many of them lived for a while, trying to evade the men from the Simon Wiesenthal organization, people dedicated to finding every last Nazi and bringing them to justice, headed by their leader, a man known as the Nazi Hunter, who was a Holocaust survivor. Even though many years have passed, the hunt still goes on, still finding those vile and depraved monsters, a subspecies of the human race. Although some are well into their dotage, justice is still being served. A particular case in point is the case of Adolf Eichmann, who, along with Heinrich Himmler, was the architect of the final solution, where 6 million Jews were sent to the death camps, only to be gassed, their bodies cremated, and the remains crushed. Eichmann was finally located in Argentina in 1961, thinking that after 16 years he was safe. But justice caught up with him, and he met the Grim Reaper on the end of a rope a year later. But returning to Henry Miller, a man who had changed his name from Henrik Mengele and who had managed to escape from his home in Germany to live in Spain, a neutral country, during the war, just after the conflict had begun. The surname he was born with, Mengele, was the same name as the man who was once revered by the Nazi Party for his inhumane and horrific experiments on unwilling participants. The infamous Dr. Joseph Mengele, a man given the name of the Angel of Death, a man, if indeed he could even be called that, who performed appalling and unspeakable experimentation on live inmates of the concentration camp at Auschwitz. Most of those subjects dying a lingering, painful, and agonizing death, all in the cause of making the so-called German master race into a nation of blue-eyed, blonde, Aryan supermen. But what had caused Henry to be reduced to his present situation? It was all due to that one barge letter that he had found on his desk just over a week before, which caused him a great deal of torment. He had read the words, his trembling hands trying to stop the shaking that was coursing through his body. The words that read, "You thought that we wouldn't find out, didn't you?" For many years, he had feared that maybe someone, somewhere, at some time, might find out about his namesake and make his life a living hell, maybe even murder him, with the idea that he was in some way engaged in the work carried out by that misguided and psychotic mass murderer, and had, somehow, missed out on receiving the same fate that had befallen the other members of the Nazi death squads. But he had been so careful, and had never told anyone of his former name, or his possible relationship to the Angel of Death at Auschwitz. So, how could someone have found out where he lived or worked? The only way out that he could think of was to go on the run, getting well away from anyone he had worked with and from where he had lived. He had no plan, just a crazed idea that he must stay out of sight in this empty building before he made his next move. All sorts of wild ideas coursing through his brain. Thoughts that he had never even dreamt about, up until now, came into his mind. It was a few weeks later in the office where Henry had formerly been employed, a place from which he had mysteriously disappeared some time previously, without explanation. One of the other employees who had worked with him had just read an article in the newspaper that had shocked him. It mentioned that his former workmate had been found dead in an abandoned building, having seemingly committed suicide by ingesting a cyanide pill. As tears welled up in his eyes, he murmured words that he found extremely difficult to say. "Henry, what happened? Why did you do it? Just as your friends here were organizing a surprise party for your birthday. You tried so hard to keep it a secret, and you thought that we wouldn't find out, didn't you?" So today's story has come to an end. Or perhaps it never really ended. There are mysteries still there, questions still unanswered, and sometimes things that seem to only exist in stories can creep into reality in unexpected ways. Are you sure that when you turn off the sound, everything around you will still be normal as before? Or is there something watching you? Either way, always remember that these are just stories, or at least we want to believe that they are. If you like moments of suspense, tension, and breathlessness, don't forget to follow me so you don't miss the next stories. And next time, when you come back, make sure you are ready, because what awaits you may be even scarier than you thought. See you again if you still have the courage to continue listening.